The morning my daughter-in-law Krista handed me a color-coded babysitting calendar. 12 weeks, laminated, with my name printed in the Caregiver column every single day. I felt something in me go very, very quiet. She set it on my kitchen table the same way you'd hand a new employee their shift schedule. I did it in 2 colors, she said. Blue for school pickups, green for the overnights. Should make things simpler. My son Paul nodded beside her, like assigning his 63-year-old mother a full-time unpaid job was perfectly reasonable. The most natural thing in the world. What neither of them knew was that I had already booked a train ticket to Victoria, British Columbia, and in less than 2 weeks, I was going to disappear. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever had your kindness treated like a contract, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Did you stay quiet? Or did you finally say enough? And if stories about family, difficult truths, and finding yourself again speak to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Silent Tears Stories. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing how far these stories travel. My name is Janet Aldridge. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse in Hamilton, Ontario, and for most of my adult life, I believed that being needed was the same thing as being loved. My husband George was an electrician, steady, quiet, the kind of man who brought you tea without being asked. We built our life in a brick house on a street lined with old maples, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from driveways. We had one son, Paul. We gave him everything we could, not because we had much, but because we wanted him to feel safe in the world. George died 2 years ago. A heart attack. Fast. And without warning, the way those things sometimes are. I remember the doctor's face in the hallway, and thinking, I've worn that expression myself. I've delivered this news. 31 years of nursing and nothing prepares you for being on the other side of it. After George was gone, the house became a different kind of place. The same rooms, the same furniture, the same light through the kitchen window every morning. But quiet in a way it had never been before. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Paul lived 25 minutes away with his wife Krista and their 2 children. Anna, who was 9 and already too sharp for her own good, and Cooper, who was 6 and loved dinosaurs with a seriousness that made me smile every single time I saw him. They were my brightest part of the week. Paul called often in those first months. Krista brought casseroles. I told myself I had family close. I told myself I was lucky. The helping started naturally. I picked Anna up from school on Tuesdays because Krista had late meetings. I took Cooper to swimming lessons on Thursdays because Paul got stuck at work. I made Sunday dinner every week because it gave everyone somewhere to go. I didn't mind any of it. I was glad of the purpose. After George died, purpose felt like something you had to hunt for, and I was grateful for every piece I could find. But there's a version of gratitude that curdles over time when nobody notices it. The thank yous stopped gradually. Not all at once. That would have been easy to see. First, Krista stopped saying, "You're a lifesaver." Then she stopped saying, "Thank you." Then the requests stopped being requests. "Can you get Anna tomorrow?" became, "We need you for Anna tomorrow." The question marks disappeared. And somewhere in all of that, without anyone deciding it, I became less like family and more like a service. I noticed. I just didn't say anything. Partly because I loved them. Partly because I'd spent 2 years learning that loneliness is easier to bear when you stay useful. One Saturday in October, Paul called to ask if I could come by in the morning. "We've got some errands," he said. I arrived at 8. Krista met me at the door, handed me a list, and was in the car before I'd finished reading it. The list included meals, laundry, cleaning the mudroom, and organizing Anna's craft bins. I stood in their kitchen holding it, thinking surely this was a joke. It wasn't. I told myself it was fine. I'd told myself that 100 times by then. A few weeks after that, the requests multiplied into something I could no longer ignore. A 6:15 a.m. text asking me to come immediately because Cooper had forgotten something for school and Krista had an early call. A Friday evening, where I was informed, not asked, that the children would be dropped off at my house by 6. Then the laminated calendar. The one that covered December and January, and the first week of February, without a single question mark anywhere on the page. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Wednesday in November. Anna had a half day, so I picked her up and brought her to their house. I let myself in through the side door the way I always did. Krista had given me the code months ago. Anna ran upstairs to change. I set her backpack on the kitchen counter. The house seemed empty. I assumed Krista was at her office. Then I heard her voice from the living room. She was on the phone. I should have made a sound. I should have walked in and announced myself. Instead, I froze because I heard my name. "Paul's mum just does it," Krista was saying, in the tone of someone sharing a useful shortcut. There was a laugh from the other end. "No, I mean she literally handles everything. I don't know why anyone pays for daycare." The floor shifted under me. The other person said something I couldn't make out. Krista laughed. "She loves feeling needed. Since George died, she's got nothing going on. Honestly, I barely have to ask anymore. She just shows up." A pause. "Then Paul says the same thing. She doesn't really have a life outside of us." I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that I had to step back outside through the side door before Krista came into the kitchen. I sat in my car in their driveway and stared at the steering wheel. "She doesn't really have a life outside of us." Paul had said that. Not Krista. Paul, my son, who sat beside his father in hospital waiting rooms, who cried at the kitchen table the night the doctors changed their language, who held my hand at the funeral and said, "I'll look after you, Mum. I promise." I drove home slowly. The city looked different somehow, like a place I was seeing clearly for the first time after a very long blur. That evening, I opened the wooden box I kept on the bedroom shelf, the one I hadn't touched since the first winter after George died. Inside were things I'd been too raw to sort through: letters, photographs, an anniversary card in George's handwriting, which was terrible and dear at the same time. Near the bottom was an envelope, my name on the front, his handwriting. He'd written the letter 4 years before he died, during a stretch when his health had been uncertain, and he'd gotten sentimental about things. I had forgotten it existed. The letter talked about ordinary things at first. Memories, things he was grateful for. Then I reached a paragraph that stopped me cold. "You have been looking after people your whole career, and then you came home and looked after us, and I don't know if anyone has ever properly thanked you for that. When I'm gone, and I know one of us goes first, don't disappear into everyone else's needs. You know how to do that, Janet. You've been doing it your whole life. But your life isn't over just because mine is. Don't let anyone make you feel like it is." I read it 4 times. Then I went to my laptop and looked up trains to Victoria. George and I had planned that trip twice. The ferry from Savassen, the harbor, the Butchart Gardens. We booked it once and had to cancel for work. Booked it again and canceled when his health shifted. Then there was no more planning trips, only getting through one season at a time. I sat in front of my laptop and thought, if not now, then when exactly? I booked a Via Rail train to Vancouver and a connection to Victoria. 11 days. A small hotel near the inner harbor. I'd never done anything like it alone. I pressed confirm before I could talk myself out of it. I felt guilty the next morning. That surprised me. Then it made me angry. Angry at myself for feeling guilty about a train ticket. I'd worked 31 years. I'd held hands with strangers at the end of their lives and come home and done it all over again the next day. A holiday should not feel like a transgression. I kept the trip to myself. I knew exactly what would happen if I told them. The sighing, the negotiating, the way Krista could make any conversation about what my life was costing her schedule. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I left a brief voicemail for Paul 2 days before I left. Traveling for a while. I'd be in touch. I did not say where. I did not say how long. I took the morning train west and didn't look at my phone until we were past Sudbury. Victoria was everything I'd hoped for and nothing I'd quite imagined. The harbor in November was cold and silver gray, the kind of gray that looks beautiful rather than bleak. There were herons and old stone buildings and a slowness in the air I hadn't felt in years. I walked for hours the first afternoon and did not feel tired. Paul called on the second evening. I answered. "Mum, where are you?" "Victoria." Silence. "Victoria, BC?" "Yes." Another silence. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I needed a trip." "What about the kids? Krista's schedule?" "That's something you and Krista will need to sort out together." He didn't know what to do with that. I could hear it in the way he stopped forming his next sentence. Then, quietly, "We were counting on you, Mum." I looked out at the harbor lights reflecting on the water. "I know you were." I ended the call gently. My hands were steadier than I expected. The texts started within the hour. Krista first, then Paul, then Krista again. "This is incredibly selfish. We have careers, Janet. Do you understand what you've done?" I read them once and set my phone face down on the nightstand. The next morning came a notification from my bank. A payment attempt had been declined. The merchant was a childcare booking service. The account flagged was one connected to pre-authorized payment access I'd set up years ago to help Paul and Krista through a difficult financial stretch. I'd forgotten the access was still on file. I called the bank immediately. The representative confirmed the attempt had come from a device registered to Paul and Krista's household. Not fraud in the legal sense, access that had once been granted, now used without asking. I had it removed in 20 minutes. I sat with the phone in my hands for a long time. I opened my banking app and began going back through years of transactions. What I found made me very still. The pattern was not dramatic. No single amount large enough to notice at the time, but consistent, quiet. Paul's internet for 2 months when they were short. Anna's tutoring fees, charged to my card because Krista said she'd transfer me back and then simply didn't. Cooper's hockey registration. A car repair during what had been described as a genuine emergency. The same month, Krista posted photographs from a weekend in Whistler with friends. Across 5 years, the total was significant. None of it had been thanked for in the way that stays with you. Most of it had been framed as temporary, just this once, and then quietly folded into the background of our relationship, and forgotten. I opened my notebook and wrote down every transaction I could find. I didn't know yet exactly why. I knew it needed to be documented. On my 4th day in Victoria, I met a woman named Loretta Svensson at a cafe near the harbor. She'd come from Winnipeg, also alone. She didn't explain why right away, and I didn't ask. We talked for 3 hours. By the end of the first, she'd spent 2 years essentially raising her daughter's children while her daughter completed her MBA. By the end of the second, I'd told her everything. "They didn't mean to," Loretta said, "and it still happened." That sentence settled in me like a stone, finding still water. She was right. Paul hadn't set out to use me. Krista hadn't made a calculated decision on a particular morning. What had happened was subtler, and in some ways worse. They had stopped seeing me as someone with wants of her own, so gradually that I'd help them do it without realizing. Being needed is not the same as being loved. It had taken me 63 years and a train ticket to the Pacific Coast to understand the difference. Loretta and I had coffee 2 more mornings before she flew home. She gave me her number. I kept it. Paul arrived on the 6th day. He'd flown out without telling me first and called from the airport. When he walked into the cafe where we agreed to meet, he looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was simply seeing him more clearly than I had in a long time. He ordered coffee. He didn't speak right away. "You look good," he finally said. "I feel good." He nodded. Something in him seemed to settle, not in a relaxed way, more the way things settle when they've been held up by pretense and the pretense is finally gone. "I didn't see it," he said. "I kept telling myself you were fine, that you liked being involved." A pause. "Krista said you were exaggerating when I tried to bring it up. She said you'd always been happy to help." "I was happy to help," I said. "That isn't what I objected to." I took out the notebook. I set it on the table between us and let him read. He read for a long time without speaking. The color left his face slowly, the way it does when something is sinking in rather than landing all at once. "The account," I said when he looked up. "Last week, someone from your household tried to use my stored payment information to pay for childcare. Without calling me, without asking." He went very still. "I removed the authorization. But I needed you to know it happened." "That wasn't me." His voice was quiet. "I know." We sat with that for a moment. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Near the end of it, Paul said the thing I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. "I stopped looking after you," he said. "I promised I would, and I stopped paying attention." His voice caught on the last words, not dramatically, just in the way a voice does when the person speaking it has finally arrived at something true. Krista flew in 2 days later. We met at a restaurant near the water, the three of us at a corner table. She arrived with her jaw set, already composed around a version of the story where she was the wronged party. She was partway through explaining how much this had disrupted her work schedule when Paul interrupted her, quietly and without heat. "Did you try to use Mum's account? Her stored payment information for the daycare app?" The shift in her expression was immediate. Not guilt, exactly. Something more careful. "It was still on file. I didn't think it would be a problem." "You didn't ask her." She changed direction. She said I'd always been happy to help. She said the children needed routine. She said she couldn't understand why I was making everything so much bigger than it needed to be. Then, casting around for something that might reset the conversation in her favor, she said, if Janet had just agreed to move closer, like we talked about, none of this would even be an issue. Paul turned to look at her. "We didn't talk about that." "I didn't talk about that." She stopped. I watched the understanding move across his face, slow then all at once. I reached into my bag and set a folder on the table. Inside were documents from a lawyer I'd spoken to by phone 3 days earlier. I had updated my estate plan. The house, my savings, my investments, all now held in a trust, with Anna and Cooper as direct eventual beneficiaries when they reached adulthood. Not routed through Paul and Krista, directly to the children. Krista stared at the folder. "The children are still provided for," I said. "That hasn't changed. What's changed is the structure." She said nothing. And her silence told me more than any response could have, because if her concern had truly ever been about the children, she would have been relieved. Instead, she looked like someone who had just watched a door close and understood for the first time that they no longer held the key. Paul walked me back to my hotel afterward. At the corner near the entrance, he stopped. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Really, going forward." I thought about George's letter, about Loretta's sentence, still sitting quietly in my chest. "Call me to ask how I'm doing," I said. "Not what I can do, how I'm doing." He nodded. "I can do that." I believed him. I was going to give him the chance to prove it. I came home to Hamilton on a Tuesday in early December. The house was the same. The maple out front had dropped all its leaves. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of tea and felt the quiet differently than I had in 2 years. Not empty, just still. 3 months later, I listed the house. Not because of Paul, not because of Krista, because George was right, and I had spent 2 years treating a chapter like it was the whole book. I bought a condominium overlooking Coots Paradise. I planted herbs on the balcony. I signed up for a watercolor class on Thursday evenings. My first painting was terrible, my second slightly less so, and I loved every minute of both. I called Loretta from Winnipeg every week, sometimes more. We made plans for the spring. Paul calls now just to talk. The calls are shorter than they used to be and more honest. That feels like progress. The first time I told Krista I wasn't available, directly and without apologizing, she went quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay." I sat with the phone in my hand afterward and thought, the world didn't end. It didn't. Anna asked me once, not long after I moved, whether I was still sad about Grandpa George. I told her yes, sometimes. She put her small hand on my arm and said, "But you seem happy now." I told her I was working on it. She seemed satisfied with that. Children are generous with the truth. They don't dress it up, and they don't ask for much in return. George used to say that people who spend their lives giving are often the last ones to give anything to themselves. I thought he was wrong. I thought giving was its own reward and I'd found a way to make it work indefinitely. I was wrong, and he was right, and I wish I'd told him so while I still had the chance. What I know now, at 63, is this: you can love your family completely and still have a life that belongs to you. Those things are not opposites. The people who truly love you will understand that. The ones who only needed you will make it very clear very quickly when you stop being available. Both kinds of clarity, in the end, are useful. I went back to Victoria in the spring. Loretta met me there. We walked through the Butchart Gardens on an afternoon when everything was in bloom. Roses and begonias and wisteria spilling over old stone walls. I took a photograph and sat with it for a moment, thinking of all the trips George and I had meant to take. Then I put my phone in my pocket and kept walking. There was still a lot of garden left to see.